Pay attention, because for the next 30 minutes, I'm not going to tell you a story about a little girl who lost her best friend. I'm going to tell you a story about a house where death didn't knock on the door. It lived inside. A house where the smell of flowers never meant a birthday, it meant a wake. Where the most familiar sound of childhood wasn't other kids laughing out on the street. It was the low, constant, almost gentle hum of the machine preparing bodies down in the basement. This is Vada Sultenfuss's house, and I need you to understand one thing before we go any further. Vada is not a villain. Vada is a victim. It's just that the thing that hurt her had no face, no hands, no voice. The thing that shaped that child, silently, day after day, was constant proximity to the end of all things. And the movie your mom watched crying back in the early 90s. The movie you were taught to remember as a sweet, sad little story about first love is actually the clinical portrait of a child being eaten alive from the inside by anxiety. And nobody, absolutely nobody, noticed in time. Let me take you back to Madison in the summer of 1972. The sun in that little Pennsylvania town looks warm, golden, safe. But I want you to look at Vada's house through the eyes I'm about to give you. From the outside, it's an ordinary house, but there's a sign, a polite, discreet little sign that tells you a funeral home operates there. And this is where most people make the mistake of treating that as just a quirky detail of the script, a cute little setting. It's not. It's the center of everything. Because an 11-year-old child does not separate her father's work from her own home. To Vada, there is no part of the house that's the funeral home and another part that's home. It's all the same thing. The hallway she runs down to grab a glass of milk is the same hallway the bodies come through. The room where she should be playing is the room where strangers weep over open caskets. She grew up in a place where death is not the scariest thing in life. Death is the family income. It's what puts food on her table. It's the family business. And I want you to feel the weight of that for 1 second. Imagine being a little girl and understanding, on the deepest, most childlike level, that your survival depends on other people continuing to die. Now think about the first image the film gives you of her. Vada showing up, with that expression that's far too serious for her age, saying she might have cancer. That she swallowed a chicken bone and it's stuck. That it hurts here, it hurts there. And the audience laughs. People find it cute. What a dramatic little girl, right? What an imagination. And this is exactly where I need to whisper to you the first uncomfortable truth of this film. That is not imagination. That has a name. In child psychiatry, when a child develops a persistent, intrusive, and wildly disproportionate fear of being sick, of dying, of something being wrong inside their own body, we call that health anxiety, childhood hypochondria. And it is not a phase. It is not attention-seeking in the shallow sense. It is real suffering. It is a child whose mind got trapped in a loop of terror about her own body. And where, tell me, where would an 11-year-old girl get the idea that any little ache could be the beginning of the end? Where does this fear come from, so specific, so anatomical, so adult in its dread of illness? It comes from the basement. It comes from seeing, even out of the corner of her eye, through the cracks, what happens to bodies that stop working. Vada is not afraid of death in the abstract, the way other children are, that vague fear of the dark. Her fear is concrete. She has seen where the bodies go, and her mind, small, alone, with nobody to translate it for her, arrived at the most logical and most terrifying conclusion possible. If it happens to them, it's going to happen to me. And here comes the part that gives me chills every single time I think about it. Because Vada lost her mother. Her mother died giving birth to her. Died bringing her into the world. Can you hold the weight of that sentence? The very first thing Vada's existence did on this planet was erase another existence. Her life began with a death. And not just any death. Distant. Some stranger in the casket downstairs. Her own mother's death. The person who was supposed to be her shelter, her lap, the voice that says, "Hush, sweetheart. It's just a stomachache. You don't have cancer. That voice never existed. It was ripped away from her in the exact instant she arrived, and nobody ever sat down with Vada to really talk about it. Her father, Harry, is a good man, but he's a broken man who buried his own grief in his work, surrounded by silence and by the dead. So the girl grows up carrying a guilt she can't even name, the impossible feeling that she is, somehow, responsible for a death. And she lives inside a house that is a constant reminder, physical, scented, audible, that death is real, it's close, and it can take anyone at any moment. Tell me something. What other child do you know who would have a more legitimate reason to develop a sick, gnawing terror of dying? And that's exactly why I need you to hit that like button right now. Because if you're starting to understand that the real horror stories don't happen in haunted houses, with ghosts under sheets, but inside the silent little head of a child nobody is listening to. If you're starting to see that the most real horror is the loneliness of a young mind trapped with fears far too big to carry alone. Hit the like, subscribe here to Fractured Plot to see what hides behind the stories you were taught to think of as sweet. And tell me down there in the comments if you, as a kid, also had some secret fear that the adults around you laughed off, brushed aside, or simply never noticed. I want to read them, because that's the scariest part of all of this. How many of us were a Vada without anyone ever noticing? Now let me show you how the film, scene by scene, keeps handing you the clues of a child on the edge of collapse, and how you were trained to read those clues as cuteness instead of a cry for help. The doctor visits. You remember them? Vada goes to Dr. Welty's office with a frequency that should set off an alarm in any adult. She invents symptoms. She describes pains. She lists diseases with a precision that's disturbing for her age. And the film plays it for charm. The doctor is patient. He smiles. He sends her home. But think about what's actually happening. An 11-year-old child is seeking out, alone, actively, an adult who will examine her, who will lay hands on her, who will tell her that she's okay. She is asking for help in the only language she ever learned in that house. The language of illness, of the body, of diagnosis. It's the language she hears the adults speak when the bodies arrive. It's her father's language. So when she wants attention, when she wants care, when she wants someone to hold her and tell her she's not going to die, she doesn't know how to ask for that in normal words. She asks by pretending she's sick, because sickness, in that house, is the only thing that makes an adult stop everything and look at you with real seriousness. Let me push deeper into this language of illness, because it's the backbone of everything Vada is. There's a phenomenon that developmental psychology knows very well. Children learn to ask for love by imitating the way love is handed out in their home. In a house where affection comes through food, the child learns to eat to please. In a house where affection comes through good grades, the child learns to study to be seen. And in Vada's house, the affection, the care, the total and absolute attention of an adult, all of that is reserved for one thing only, for the bodies, for the dead, for the sick who arrive. Sit with that for a second, let it sink in. Vada watches, every single day of her life, adults pouring out the most concentrated, most reverent, most careful attention in the world onto people who have already died. Her father touches those bodies with a tenderness, a delicacy, a devotion that Vada rarely receives while she's alive and running through the house. And the lesson that gets carved silently into the depths of that child's mind is a chilling one. Here, in this house, you are cared for when your body stops. You are touched with love when you get sick. You get total attention when something is wrong inside of you. So tell me, with that lesson etched into her soul, what is a child starving for attention going to do? She's going to start producing what the house rewards. She's going to start having illnesses. She'll fabricate symptoms, not because she's a cold little liar, but because in the deepest, most unconscious part of her, sickness became a synonym for love. Being sick is how you get someone to stop everything and take care of you in this house. That is not malice. That is the saddest thing I have ever seen a screenplay hide in plain daylight. And there's an even deeper layer here, one I want to whisper very quietly because it unsettles me. Vada's specific obsession with cancer, with tumors, with things growing inside her where she can't see them. That has an emotional name. It's the terror of the enemy within. It's the dread that the danger doesn't come from outside, from the dark, from the monster under the bed, like any healthy child's fear, but that the danger is already inside you, growing, silent, treacherous. And where does this particular shape of fear come from in an 11-year-old girl? It comes, once again, from the mother. Because Vada carries, without ever having put it into words, the impossible idea that she herself was what killed her own mother. That her existence, growing inside that woman, was what took her away. Vada is, in her deepest and most painful imagination, the tumor. She is the thing that grew inside someone and caused a death. And that is why she searches, with all that dread, for tumors inside herself. Because at the most hidden level of that child's psyche, she believes she carries death inside her body. That she is, by nature, a bearer of the end. Can you imagine a child carrying that, alone, without ever having the words to say it, without anyone to tell her it isn't true? That's the real horror. It's not a ghost. It's a little girl accusing herself of a murder she never committed, every single day, in the silence of her own chest. And look how twisted, how sad, how perfectly constructed. Vada's hypochondria is not cold manipulation, like some people want to sell you. It's the opposite of that. It's pure desperation. It's a child with no emotional tools trying, in the crooked and singular way she knows, to be seen. And how does the adult world around her respond to that desperation? With laughter. With condescending patience. With that half-distracted affection of people who find her charming, but never really pay attention. Nobody stops to ask why this girl is so obsessed with dying. Nobody connects the dots between the dead mother, the house full of corpses, and the growing terror inside that child. And that's where the film's silence becomes deafening. The horror of My Girl is not supernatural. It's emotional neglect happening in slow motion, wrapped in pretty music and golden summer light, so that you never notice you're watching a child drown in anxiety while everyone smiles at the edge of the pool. Now let's talk about Shelley. The arrival of Shelley, the makeup artist Harry hires to work at the funeral home, gets treated by a lot of people as the start of some silly childish jealousy. Vada doesn't like the new woman. She throws a fit, same old thing. But I want you to look at this through the lens of everything we've built here. To Vada, her father isn't just her father. Her father is the only pillar left standing. He's the only living person who anchors her in that world of the dead. The mother is gone. The kids at school think she's weird, the funeral home girl, the morbid one. The only stable human bond in her life, besides Thomas J., is that silent, distant father. And suddenly a woman shows up who steals that father's attention. To you or me, it's a stepmother arriving. To Vada, it's the last safe person in her world being taken away. It's the abyss opening a little wider under the feet of a child who's already balancing on the edge. It's not jealousy, it's abandonment panic. It's the terror that if she loses her father too, there will be absolutely no one left between her and that basement full of people who stop breathing. And notice how Vada's body reacts to Shelley's arrival, because her body always speaks before her mouth does. As Shelley gets closer to Harry, as the bond between the two adults tightens, what happens to Vada? The illnesses increase. The symptoms get more frequent, more dramatic, more urgent. And that's not a coincidence of the script. That's pure psychology unfolding right in front of your eyes. When a child feels she's losing her bond with the caregiving figure, she intensifies exactly the behaviors that used to bring that care back. If being sick was always the way to make her father look at her, and now there's a woman pulling her father's gaze away, then Vada, without ever consciously planning it, without any coldness at all, escalates the only strategy she knows. She gets sicker. She needs to get sicker. Because the love is slipping out the door, and illness is the only rope she knows how to pull. And again, pay attention to the tragedy of it. It's not a clever girl staging a performance. It's a child in panic repeating the only gesture of emotional survival she ever learned, with rising intensity while the floor vanishes beneath her feet. And nobody reads this rise in symptoms for what it is: a fire alarm ringing louder and louder inside a child, being consumed by the feeling of abandonment. And Thomas J. Oh, Thomas J. Let me tell you about the only safe place Vada had in the entire world. Thomas J. Sennett, that boy allergic to everything, gentle, loyal, who saw Vada not as the morbid funeral home girl, but simply as his best friend. Thomas J. was the one place in Vada's life where death was not present. He was pure life, running through the woods, swimming in the river, laughter, a toy ring, childhood promises. While everything else in her world smelled of formaldehyde and funeral flowers, Thomas J. smelled of summer, of grass, of possibility. He was living proof to Vada that life existed too, that not everything ended on a cold table in the basement. I need you to hold this tight in your mind right now, because it's what makes what comes next so devastating, and it's why so many people read this story so cruelly and so wrongly. The ring. The mood ring Vada loses in the woods, and Thomas J., being exactly who he is, loyal to his last breath, goes back to look for that ring for her. And he disturbs the beehive, and his body, that little body allergic to everything, can't take it. He dies, alone, in the woods, looking for a toy ring to give back to his best friend. And here, right here, there is a poisonous reading some people make. A reading that turns Vada into a cold, calculating murderer who supposedly set the whole thing up. And I want to look at you right now through the camera and tell you with all the firmness I have that this reading is not analysis. It's cruelty dressed up as cleverness. Because there is no plan. There is no premeditation. What there is the most brutal and unjust chance in the world, falling on the one child who had already seen far too much death for a whole lifetime. Vada did not kill Thomas J. Life killed Thomas J. The same indifferent chance that took her mother. And the real horror, the actual horror, is not that she planned it. The real horror is that she planned nothing. She could control nothing. And still death found the one pure place left in that little girl's life and destroyed it too. Think about what that does to Vada's mind. Her whole life, she was terrified of dying. She built imaginary diseases. She ran to the doctor. She turned her own body into a minefield of invented symptoms. Her fear was always that death would come for her. And then, death does the cruelest thing it could possibly do. It doesn't take Vada. It takes Thomas J. It proves to that anxious child that her terror was real all along. Except she was afraid for the wrong person. Death wasn't hunting her. Death was standing right beside her the whole time, waiting to take everything she loved. Imagine the devastating confirmation that is for a mind already sick with anxiety. All that fear, all that obsession, and in the end, the fear was right. People die, out of nowhere, with no warning. Even 12-year-old boys who just wanted to return a ring. And there's an even finer psychological cruelty here that I need you to hold with me. Because Vada spent her whole life fearing her own body. The enemy in her mind was always inside herself. The imaginary cancer, the bone in the throat, the secret tumor. And then reality arrives and flips it all inside out in the most brutal way possible. It wasn't Vada's body that betrayed anyone. It was Thomas J.'s body. His small, allergic body that one really did have an enemy within. A reaction that would kill him. A real biological bomb waiting for its trigger. And Vada, the girl who spent years inventing deadly diseases inside herself, discovers that the real deadly illness was in the other person, in her friend, in the one boy with a healthy spirit in her whole life. Think about what that does to the internal logic of an anxious child. She will carry, maybe forever, the impossible question. Why do I, who was always so afraid, get to stay alive, while he, who was never afraid of anything, died? That is the seed of survivor's guilt, planted in an 11-year-old soul that was already far too fertile a ground for that kind of poison. And nobody, once again, is there to tell her it's not her fault, that her fear didn't cause anything, that surviving is not a crime. She's going to have to figure that out alone, if she ever figures it out at all, in the silence of that house full of the dead. And now we arrive at that scene, the casket scene, the scene that made the whole country cry in 1991. Vada, small, walking into that viewing room she knows so well, the most familiar territory in the world to her, the family business, and seeing, for the first time, someone she loves inside one of those caskets. And she screams. She screams that line that tears your soul apart. He can't see without his glasses. Where are his glasses? He needs his glasses. And I've heard people say that scene is a performance, an act, a manipulation. And I need you to understand how profoundly wrong that reading is. That scene is the exact opposite of manipulation. That scene is the moment all of Vada's defenses collapse at once. For the entire film, death was a concept, a business, an abstract fear down in the basement. And suddenly, death has Thomas J's face. Suddenly it's not a stranger in the casket, it's the boy who held her hand. And that child's brain, unable to process a pain that enormous, grabs onto the only detail it can hold, the glasses. Because the complete truth, the truth that her friend will never run again, never laugh again, never come back, that truth is too big. So her mind breaks it into bearable little pieces. He needs his glasses, as if there were still one small problem to solve, as if death were just an inconvenience we fix. This is not acting. This is the exact sound of a child breaking apart from the inside in real time. And let me show you why this scene, specifically, proves the opposite of everything the cruel reading wants to sell you. There's a concept that haunts anyone who studies trauma: desensitization. The idea that when you're exposed to something terrifying over and over, you go numb, you stop feeling. The thing loses its power to hurt you. And the cold theory about Vada says exactly this: that growing up in the funeral home numbed her, stripped her of empathy, made death trivial in her eyes. But the casket scene shatters that theory into pieces. Because if Vada really were desensitized, if death really were trivial to her, she would look at Thomas J in that casket with the same professional calm she watches her father treat the bodies with. She'd be cold. She'd be numb. But that's not what happens, is it? What happens is the most total, most desperate, most visceral collapse of the entire film. She is not numb. She is feeling everything all at once with an intensity that breaks her body in half. And that proves something beautiful and devastating at the same time. The funeral home never managed to kill Vada's capacity to love and to grieve. She grew up surrounded by death, yes, but her heart never turned to stone. It only became terrified. There's a vast difference between a child with no empathy and a child terrified of death. And the casket scene shows you, beyond any doubt, which side Vada was always on. She feels too much. She always felt too much. That was always her problem. Not the absence of feeling, the excess of it, with no one to help her carry it. And there's the matter of the glasses, which I'm not going to let go of so easily, because it's the broken heart of the whole film. He can't see without his glasses. Say it slowly with me. He can't see without his glasses. What Vada's mind is doing there is something psychology calls denial, but not the cold denial of someone refusing to accept. It's protective denial, the kind a child's brain throws up in a hurry so it doesn't collapse all at once. The complete truth is unbearable. Thomas J is dead. He's not coming back. He'll never see anything again, glasses or not. But that truth is too big for a little girl to hold at once. So her mind grabs onto a small, solvable, familiar problem: the glasses. If the problem is only the glasses, then it's still fixable. Then he's still in there, just needing to see. It's the same mechanism as when we lose someone, and for weeks we still reach for the phone to call them, forgetting for a second that they're gone. It's the brain protecting us from the truth in small doses, because the full dose would kill us. And to watch this happen to a child, to watch an 11-year-old girl, build this desperate defense in real time in front of her best friend's casket. It's the most human and most heartbreaking thing that film offers you. And they sold it to you as manipulation. What cruelty. And here is where the film hands you the key to everything if you have the courage to see it. The funeral home, that place that gave Vada such an early and profound fear of death, is the same place that never taught her how to cry. Do you see the cruel irony? She grew up surrounded by professional grief. She watched hundreds of families weep in her living room, but nobody ever taught that girl to grieve for herself. Grief in Vada's house was always someone else's, always the business, always organized, arranged, invoiced. And when the time finally comes for her to feel a real loss, she has no idea how. She grew up in a temple of death, and no one ever truly introduced her to grief. That's the finest and most terrifying line of the film. The child who knew death best was the one least prepared to feel it. And if this reading just changed the way you see this movie from your childhood forever, if you'll never again be able to watch My Girl thinking it's just a sweet little sad story, but instead understanding that it's the portrait of a child drowning in silence, then confirm your subscription here to Fractured Plot right now. Hit that like and turn on the notification bell. Because we're going to keep doing this, lesson by lesson, film by film, walking into the stories you thought you knew and revealing the human mind hiding inside them before you spend your whole life missing what's going on inside the people sitting right next to you. Let me close with you the way only Fractured Plot closes. We started this journey with a provocation. I told you that you cried for the wrong person for 30 years, and maybe you thought I was going to tell you that Thomas J. didn't deserve your tears. No, Thomas J. deserves every tear. But what I need you to understand, now that we've walked together through the inside of this story, is that there is a second victim in this film that almost nobody cried for. And that victim is Vada. Not a villain, not a murderer, not a calculating mind. A little girl who was born from a death, grew up inside a house of the dead, developed a sick terror of the end of things, screamed for help in the only language she knew, and was answered with laughter. A child who had the one pure place in her life ripped away by the same blind chance she always feared, and who, in the end, had to learn to grieve in a place that teaches everyone's grief but her own. The real horror of My Girl was never a murder. Murder would be easy. Murder would have a culprit, a villain, someone to hate, a reason to sleep soundly. The real horror is far worse than that. It's the absence of a villain. It's the idea that a child can be sinking right before our eyes, surrounded by adults who love her in a beautiful golden summer, and still nobody notices in time. The monster of this film has no face. The monster is the silence. The monster is the fear no one listened to. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this story into your own home tonight, it's this. Pay attention to the children who complain too much about aches and pains that aren't there. Because sometimes, just sometimes, their body is inventing an illness because their soul is desperately trying to say something they don't yet have the words for. And the worst ghost there is the one of a child who asked for help their whole life in the only way they knew how and whom no one ever heard.